$38 trillion. Let that number sink in. It is not just a statistic on a debt clock. It is an economic black hole, larger than the entire GDP of China, Japan, and Germany combined. Welcome to 2025. This is not just another fiscal year. It is the mathematical breaking point. For the first time in history, the United States government is burning $1 trillion annually just to pay the interest on its own debt, while Washington prints currency like it is confetti. Something darker is happening on the other side of the globe. Why are Beijing and Moscow quietly hoarding thousands of tons of gold bars in heavily guarded vaults? They are not preparing for a jewelry exhibition. They are building a fire escape. And when they finally kick the door open, the green paper in your wallet will not just be collateral damage. It will be the target. To truly understand the storm that is coming, you must first unlearn everything you thought you knew about the dollar in your wallet. It is time to peel back the curtain on the greatest illusion in financial history. Most people believe the US dollar is a neutral asset, a simple medium of exchange for goods and services. That is the fairy tale they want you to believe. In reality, the dollar is a sophisticated geopolitical weapon, a tool of absolute control that dictates who wins and who loses on the global stage. This machine operates on two invisible gears that most Americans never see. The first is a structural trap known as the Triffin dilemma. To keep the world's economy spinning, the United States is forced to run massive, unending deficits, pumping a sea of dollars into every corner of the planet. If we stop spending more than we have, global trade grinds to a halt. The second gear is enforced dependency. The world does not use the dollar because it loves it. It uses it because it has no choice. By forcing the globe to price oil and essential commodities in greenbacks, the US created a system where every nation must stockpile our debt just to keep their lights on. You might think the national debt is a problem for politicians in Washington to solve, but that is a dangerous misunderstanding. Every trillion added to that debt clock is an invisible tax directly on your future. It is a silent thief that devalues every hour you work and every cent you save. You are not just a citizen. You are the collateral for a loan the government can never repay. This system was not a random accident of history. It was a deliberate blueprint, a masterpiece of financial engineering designed to trap you in a cycle of dependency that is finally starting to fracture. But this global hegemony did not appear out of thin air on a quiet afternoon. It was forged in the fires of a betrayal that took place on a very specific Sunday in 1971. The date was August 15th, 1971. While most Americans were enjoying a quiet summer evening, President Richard Nixon walked onto national television to commit what can only be described as the ultimate financial betrayal. In a single announcement, he temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, effectively slamming the gold window shut for good. This was the birth of the fiat dollar system, a world where money is created out of thin air, backed by nothing but a government's promise. The context behind this move was not one of strength, but of desperation. The United States had been spending far beyond its means, printing massive amounts of currency to fund foreign wars and domestic programs, while its gold reserves were dwindling. Nations like France and Great Britain saw the writing on the wall. They began sending shiploads of paper dollars back to the US Treasury, demanding the physical gold they had been promised. Faced with a choice between national bankruptcy or breaking its word, Washington chose the latter. But how do you keep the world using a currency that has no intrinsic value? You find a new anchor. Enter Henry Kissinger and the petrodollar deal. A strategic pact was forged with Saudi Arabia. The United States would provide absolute military protection for the House of Saud, and in exchange every barrel of oil sold to the world would be priced exclusively in US dollars. This forced every nation on earth to hoard dollars just to buy energy, creating a permanent artificial demand for a currency backed by nothing. The cold reality is that from that moment on, the dollar was no longer secured by the gold in Fort Knox. It was secured by the roar of jet engines and the scarcity of black gold. It was a brilliant, ruthless masterpiece of survival that allowed America to export its debt and import the world's wealth for decades. This system operated with terrifying efficiency for 50 years, creating a period of dominance that seemed untouchable, until Washington committed a fatal error that finally forced the rest of the world to stop playing the game. To understand why the world is currently rebelling, you must understand how this engine has hummed along for decades while breaking every law of traditional economics. It starts with the magic trick of exporting inflation. When the Federal Reserve prints trillions of dollars, those bills do not stay within American borders to drive up the price of your milk and eggs immediately. Instead, they flood the global market to purchase tangible wealth. America receives physical goods, automobiles from Japan, electronics from Korea, and raw copper from Chile, while the world receives green slips of paper. This allows the United States to consume far more than it produces, effectively pushing the inflationary pressure onto developing nations. In this arrangement, Americans enjoy the products of global labor, while the rest of the planet deals with the rising prices caused by a surplus of devaluing dollars. The second gear in this machine is the weaponization of the SWIFT system. Think of SWIFT not as a neutral bank, but as a digital financial police force controlled by Washington. Because the dollar is the global medium of exchange, almost every international transaction must pass through this American guarded gateway. This gives the US the terrifying power to flip a switch and effectively delete a nation from the global economy. If a country refuses to align with American interests, they find their banks frozen and their ability to trade for food or medicine paralyzed. It is a digital blockade that is often more devastating than a physical one. Finally, we arrive at what economists call the exorbitant privilege. The United States holds a unique power that no other nation from Argentina to Zimbabwe can claim: the ability to borrow money in the exact same currency it prints. If a foreign nation finds itself deep in debt, it must produce actual goods or services to earn the dollars needed to pay it back. If the United States finds itself $38 trillion in the hole, it can simply issue more debt or print more currency to service the interest. This allows Washington to borrow at lower interest rates than anyone else, essentially forcing the global population to subsidize the American lifestyle. It is a game where the house always wins, and for 50 years the rest of the world was forced to keep playing. But a weapon is only a deterrent until you actually use it at full capacity, and in 2022, Washington decided to pull the trigger with total disregard for the consequences. The most explosive example of this financial power in action occurred in February 2022, during the freeze of Russian assets. When the conflict in Ukraine erupted, the West did not just send equipment, they launched a full-scale financial strike by disconnecting major Russian banks from the SWIFT system and freezing over $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves. For decades, the global consensus was that central bank reserves were sacrosanct neutral territory that no one would dare touch. Washington proved that theory dead wrong in a single weekend. The expected result was the total collapse of the Russian economy. But the collapse never came. Instead, the world witnessed something far more significant: the ultimate wake-up call for every non-Western nation on the planet. Leaders in Beijing, New Delhi, and Riyadh watched as one of the world's largest economies was effectively erased from the digital ledger. The message was deafeningly clear: your money in an American bank is not actually yours. It is a permission-based asset that can be revoked the moment you stop following Washington's orders. This was the exact moment the fundamental pillar of the global economy, trust, was shattered. If the United States could seize the wealth of a nuclear-armed superpower, what would stop them from doing the same to a smaller nation that refused to align with their foreign policy? For the BRICS nations, this was no longer a theoretical debate about economic diversity. It became a matter of national survival and financial sovereignty. They realized that as long as they resided within the dollar-based house, the landlord held the keys to their front door and could lock them out at any time. This realization ignited a frantic search for an exit strategy, leading these emerging giants to stop complaining about the system and start building their own. And as that trust evaporated into thin air, they began meticulously constructing a massive gold-lined lifeboat to weather the coming storm. As the dust settled on the 2022 asset freeze, the BRICS alliance evolved from a simple economic discussion club into a formidable strategic force. They are no longer just talking about a multipolar world, they are engineering it through sophisticated monetary cooperation projects like the BRICS Bridge and the proposed unit currency. This is not a direct military attack on the United States. It is a cold, calculated defensive maneuver to replace a broken system with a parallel one. The core of this new strategy is a massive, quiet migration into physical gold. Data from the World Gold Council reveals that central banks within the BRICS bloc have ramped up their reserves at a staggering pace, jumping from 4,360 tons in 2018 to over 5,550 tons by 2024. China and Russia are leading this charge, systematically dumping their U.S. Treasury holdings mere slips of paper and replacing them with the only asset that has no counterparty risk and cannot be deleted by a Washington bureaucrat: gold. Between 2006 and 2024, the BRICS gold reserves grew by an incredible 278%, while the G7 nations sat stagnant or slightly declined. But gold is only the foundation. The second stage of this evolution is the death of the petrodollar through local currency settlement. We are now seeing Russia trade oil for Chinese yuan, and India purchasing energy in rupees. Even Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the original dollar deal, is now open to accepting other currencies for its black gold. This bypasses the SWIFT system entirely, moving wealth through independent channels like China's CIPS. The final logic is simple but devastating for the dollar's future. The BRICS have proposed a common trade currency where 40% of its value would be directly backed by physical gold. In the cold eyes of a global investor, which is a safer bet, a new currency backed by thousands of tons of real tangible gold, or a legacy dollar backed by $38 trillion in unpayable debt and a polarized political system? The answer is shifting the balance of global power in real time. You might think this is just a high-level chess game played by world leaders in distant palaces, but the ripples of this movement are already reaching your front door. All you have to do is look at your latest grocery bill to see the damage. Today, you do not need to be a financial expert or a Wall Street insider to feel the crushing weight of this tectonic shift. You only need to walk into a grocery store or pull up to a gas station to see the grim reality of the dollar's slow retreat. For 50 years, the United States enjoyed the luxury of exporting its inflation to the rest of the world, but that era is coming to a violent end. As the movement toward de-dollarization accelerates and nations from the BRICS bloc stop purchasing American debt, those trillions of excess greenbacks have nowhere to go but back home. When the world no longer wants our paper, that paper floods our own borders. And the result is a domestic inflationary spiral that no interest rate hike can fix. This is why your paycheck feels smaller even if the numbers haven't changed. Your savings account is not just sitting there, it is evaporating. The purchasing power you spent years working to build is being stolen, not by a single event but by the fundamental devaluation of the currency itself. We are witnessing the exorbitant privilege turn into an exorbitant nightmare. Every time the government prints more to cover the interest on that $38 trillion debt, they are effectively diluting your life's work. You are being trapped in a system designed to make you lose, forced to watch as the cost of survival climbs while the value of your dollar sinks. The safety net you were promised is fraying at the edges because the very foundation it was built upon, unquestioned dollar dominance, is cracking under the pressure of a new gold-backed reality. We are no longer talking about a distant economic theory. We are talking about your ability to retire, your ability to own a home, and your ability to protect your family from a collapse that is already in motion. So what is the final endgame? And here is the most critical point to grasp. The collapse of a monetary empire rarely happens overnight, but once the structural rot sets in, it becomes irreversible. The fragmenting of the global financial system is no longer a fringe theory. It is a strategic reality being shaped by the rise of parallel ecosystems and neutral assets. The question is no longer whether the dollar will eventually lose its absolute throne, but rather a question of timing and preparation. We are moving toward a multipolar world where the exorbitant privilege is being replaced by a gold-backed reality. When the music finally stops and the digital ledgers are reset, the ultimate divide will be between those holding depreciating paper and those holding tangible strategic assets. The system was not designed for your protection, it was designed for its own survival. The choice of what you hold next is yours. History is littered with the remains of currencies that people once believed were eternal. From the Dutch guilder to the Spanish real and the British pound, every dominant empire eventually watched its monetary privilege crumble under the weight of debt and overextension. The United States is not an exception to the laws of mathematics. You cannot print your way out of a $38 trillion hole. That debt is a mathematical certainty that can never be repaid with honest labor. While Wall Street analysts distract you with the latest tech stocks and paper gains, the world's central banks are quietly moving in the opposite direction. They are hoarding physical gold at rates unseen in decades because they see the cracks in the foundation that you are told to ignore. History does not repeat itself. But as Mark Twain once said, it often rhymes. The rhyme we are hearing now is the closing chapter of the exorbitant privilege and the beginning of a cold, fragmented financial reality. If you want to understand how to protect what you have built before the storm fully makes landfall, leave a number 1 in the comments. Subscribe to Financial Money History. We have much more to discuss regarding this new world order.